It's great to welcome to the program today the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy. Governor, so great to have you on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, David, for having me. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan and honored to be with you.
It's the honor is here as well. So I want to start by talking about New Jersey. In 2024, the margin of victory for Kamala Harris was surprisingly narrow to me. 6 points compared to just a massive win for former President Biden. Hillary Clinton, even in losing in 2016, won New Jersey by 16 points. What is happening politically in the state that we can glean from that presidential result just a few months ago?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure there's a crisp, singular answer. If you look at New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois, California, they all moved 10 or 12 points to the right relative to the 2020 presidential. I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I think it is very specific to Donald Trump. And we're going to find out because we've got a governor's race this year. We're one of two states that have statewide races this year, Virginia and New Jersey governor.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you take nothing for granted. It's a pretty sobering result. Republicans have been out-registering Democrats over the past many months. Now, that's up against a very significant, still remaining registration advantage for Democrats. And I think we're not immune to the general issue right now with our party, and that is we're viewed to not have our act together or have momentum or have a crisp message. I think we're doing a decent job of that in New Jersey. We're living at the kitchen table, which is where I think you go to if you've got a message or a substance issue. But time will tell. As I say, we've got a real test this year. Primaries are next week. The generals in November. We shall see.
One of the things I want to ask you about now, as this big, beautiful bill has been passed by the House of Representatives, is going to the Senate, the SALT cap, the cap on state and local tax deductions for states like New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. This has been a very big deal since it passed as part of the 2017 tax bill that Republicans passed. And I think theoretically, the audience understands, okay, if you are in some of these blue states that might have higher income taxes and property taxes, you very quickly lose the benefit of being able to deduct those taxes when a limit is placed arbitrarily at, say, $10,000 or wherever the case may be. What I'm curious is, as the administrator of New Jersey, that means the people in your state now have less disposable income to put into the small businesses that are there. So there's like a real sort of trickle down effect from the SALT cap that may be lost on people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is it. As you rightfully point out, this has been in place now for a number of years, partly because of the pandemic, but partly because I will say a lot of policy moves that we've made in New Jersey, we've been able to mitigate that pain. Now, that doesn't mean that we like it. We want to see this lifted entirely, never mind this modest lift that the so-called big, beautiful bill accomplishes. But right now in New Jersey, we've never had more people living here, employed here, businesses in operation here. Revenues are at an all-time high. I'm knocking on wood because, as you know, the national and global environment is highly volatile. But yeah, I'd love to see the cap lifted entirely. It's the modest lift is one of the failed elements of this big, beautiful bill, which we could get into if should you want to. But Medicaid cuts, it's inflationary. It doesn't lift the cap on state and local taxes sufficiently, on and on and on. So the answer is it's had some impact, but that impact has been mitigated by a couple of big mega forces, including things that have gone quite well here. But we still hope to get this cap lifted for sure.
What about the tariffs, which are on again, off again, depending what day you check? What has been the effect there at the New Jersey state level?
Too early to tell, but, for instance, New Jersey's one of 36 states where Canada is our number one trading partner.
Mm-hmm.
So if these go into effect ultimately, and by the way, the on again, off again has made America less reliable,
Yeah.
which is not good for the home team.
Right.
Forget New Jersey for a moment. That's bad for America. A strong dollar is in our national interests. We should be seen to be sticking by our allies and being a reliable partner. This whole herky-jerky past several months is not good for the home team. But New Jersey won't be immune. If these tariffs go into place, we will not be immune. We have one kind of historical benefit, if you will, in this context. We used to be a big metal bender state. We used to be a big car, truck, chemical state.
Right.
Frankly, I wish we had a good chunk of that back, but we don't. We're now the quintessential innovation economy. Tech, telecom, bio, pharma, life sciences, green economy, film, television, digital, fintech. That's where we make our living in New Jersey. Not dissimilar in many respects from Massachusetts, where you are. That type of economy is going to be less impacted than the so-called metal bender economies. So on the margin, New Jersey probably less impacted, but not immune. This is inflationary. Consumers will pay through the nose for these tariffs. And New Jersey, as I say, will not be able to skirt this.
You seem to be, at least from what I see in the media, one of the governors who's maintained a little more of a cordial relationship with Donald Trump. Is that perception correct? And talk a little bit about that. Is it like the New York, New Jersey thing that there's sort of like something there that keeps it more cordial? Or how do you see your relationship with the president?
Yeah, I think it begins with a couple of things. One is New Jersey is a state of interest for the president. I think you could argue without any question that Florida is his primary residence, and legally and spiritually. But New Jersey is also a state where he has a home. He has significant roots. He had a big history in Atlantic City. It's adjacent to New York, where he obviously grew up. So that's one big reason. Secondly, during the darkest days of the pandemic, I know folks may react to this now with the subsequent history, but he and his team were incredibly important partners to us in the early days, March, April, May, June of 2020. And for all the loss of life that we suffered in New Jersey, it would have been a lot worse without his team's help and partnership. And again, I know folks hear that now, particularly on my side of the aisle, and say, what are you saying, man? The fact of the matter is it's true. And we've stayed in touch. I'm going to see him this weekend for a few moments. It doesn't mean I agree with a whole lot of what's going on. I certainly don't. But it also doesn't mean that if there's common ground to be found, that we won't be aggressive in trying to find that. Historically for us, beyond the pandemic, that's been largely in infrastructure and transportation. Spent a lot of time with Secretary Sean Duffy over the past number of months, by example. But yes, I think we could choose to disagree, and we do so aggressively in a whole lot of stuff, but still find commonality where we can.
What did he do early in the pandemic specifically that was so useful for New Jersey?
Well, I would say this, that you'll recall that when the pandemic first hit America, it was Metro New York that hit the U.S. hardest, earliest. Yeah. And that's where we were crushed. They helped us get stuff that we were running out of, in particular, ventilators, PPE more broadly. They were sort of the lender of last resort, if you will, in helping us source some things that we were literally, I think in ventilators, we were down to single digits. And I give them a lot of credit for their help early on.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your view as to where the Democratic Party should go over the next 2 and 4 years. You know, we've spoken to other governors, members of the Senate, members of the House. Everybody has their sort of view as to what kind of needs to happen. One of the big divides right now is generationally, should the presidential candidate be significantly younger than former President Biden, or is that not really super important? Ideologically, there's a question as to move to the middle versus move further to the left, and you can kind of combine these different questions in different ways. What's your sense of what needs to happen?
I'd say three things. I'm not obsessed with age. I think we've got an extraordinary bench. The bench so happens to be covers largely as the fat middle, if you will, the demographic of that bench is that a very old bench. We've got some terrific talent, unbiased toward governors. I just look at the Democratic governors right now and say, wow, this is an incredible group. So I'm not terribly concerned about the age question. I want a process that brings the best talent to the fore. Secondly, we got to live at the kitchen table. And when people ask me about myself, who am I? I say, you know who I am? I'm a proud progressive and a cold-blooded capitalist, period. And I think you can be both. Those are not at odds with each other. But by any measure, you got to live at the kitchen table. Affordability, opportunity, recapturing the reality, not this abstract American dream, but this is real for you and your children and their children. And then thirdly, the piece that gets less focused on, I was a big Howard Dean 50-state strategy guy. In fact, I gave up everything else in my professional life to become a full-time volunteer as the national finance chair to raise the money for Howard's vision of the Democratic National Committee. We as a party consistently fail the tests, the basic, unsexy plumbing, wiring. Are you in business in every state, up and down the ballot, knocking on every door, not just the home team doors, in a 4-year cycle? The Republicans beat the crap out of us on all of what I've just said. Howard was the one glimmer over the past several decades. I think Ken Martin believes in that, or the chair now of the DNC. Time will tell, but that to me that's the three-legged stool. Encourage the talent to come to the fore, live at the kitchen table, be both progressive and capitalist, and don't ignore the wiring and the plumbing. We do so at our peril.
What do you say to the growing movement on the left that's actually much more overtly skeptical or even hostile to capitalism? I ask this as a non-socialist myself, but I can't deny that there is this growing hankering for, hey, capitalism's failing a lot of us. Let's try something different. What do you say to that wing?
I say unfettered capitalism is failing, folks. But capitalism is brought to you by the Democratic Party, by the likes of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. That was the record is unambiguous that those were extraordinarily successful and inclusive years. That doesn't mean you can allow it to run free and not pay attention to the bumpers that you need in place. We've done that in New Jersey in a big way. See, for instance, one example, we tried for a while to get the minimum wage raised meaningfully. We finally got it done.
Yeah.
The naysayers were saying you'll tank the economy. Small businesses will go out of business. That didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened because folks have more money to spend. They're more secure in the middle class. There are a lot of false choices that are before us that I think we have to push back on. And clearly, unfettered capitalism is different than capitalism brought to you by progressive, inclusive leaders. And that to me is the formula.
Well, we've got a couple of very meaningful elections coming up here over the next few years. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me.